Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
All right, welcome to the Stoa, everyone. I'm Peter Limberg, the steward of the Stoa. The Stoa is a place for us to cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the nice edge of this very moment. And this is another edition of our Stealing the Culture with Dialogos. This is the fourth one. And I'll explain how the series works. Four interlocutors have a conversation around kind of a tractor concept. And today is going to be on Metamodern play. And so a moment I'll introduce the speakers, but if everyone who's not a speaker today can just turn off their camera for the first portion, because that will help with the YouTube showing. And so in a moment, I'll tag in Laurence after I introduce the speakers. But how this is going to work is Laurence is going to give an initial prompt on the topic of metamodern play. He's going to share his thoughts. And then whoever is called to speak amongst Daniel, Sarah, or John may speak. There's no real rules or guidelines. Maybe a soft one that I like to share is just share the conversational airspace. It's really an emergent conversation that that happens here. And then that will be for about 60 minutes. And then we'll pause and then pivot to the next portion. And the next portion, we're actually going to play the glass bead game. For those of you who are at the Stoa, we have the glass bead game in our wisdom gym that happens every Saturday. We'll explain how that works. And then we might squeeze in a Q&A near the end too. So if you do have any questions, you can throw them in the chat. So we'll be here for 90 minutes in total. And the first 60 minutes is the Dialogos emergent conversation. So before I tag in Laurence in, I'll just introduce our kind of our guests today. And all have been at the Stoa before, so if they probably need no introduction. But first, John, my good friend John Vervaeke is here, who's basically his mind is like part of the DNA of the Stoa. And then the title of this event, Stealing the Culture with Dialogos, he basically, I think he was his first Stoa session. That's what when that phrase came out of his mouth and became sort of our spiritual battle cry here at the Stoa. And of course, he has come up with Dialogos with a bunch of other people in this space. And he's a professor at the University of Toronto, and he's pretty well known for his Awakening from the Meaning Crisis YouTube series. Then we have Daniel Görtz, one half of the Hansi Freinacht character. And Daniel was the Sensemaker in residence previously at the Stoa, author of the Listening Society, Metamodern Guide to Politics, and the rest of the Metamodern series. And we got Sarah Perry is back, author of Every Cradle is a Grave. Lots of beautiful articles for the Ribbon Farm and other blogs. One of them I quite like is Weaponized Sacredness. This combination is quite interesting because Daniel, of course, is pivotal in the metamodern scene. Sarah is known in the kind of the post-rational scene. John is in like the sense-making web, Dialogos, and then Laurence Currie is, of course, everywhere. But the different kind of scenes that not really intersect with each other, but they're kind of touching and gesturing on similar topics. So I think it's I'm quite excited about this interaction. So that being said, I will tag in Laurence now, and he can share his opening thoughts.
Thank you, Peter. So today we're going to talk about play. And if we're going to talk about play, we need to get into the play frame. To get into the play frame, we're going to have to break out of the frame that we've brought here and feel into the frame of play. And seeing that we all know that soma precedes psyche, I invite you all to move your body a little bit. Shake out that frame that you've brought with you. Stand up, get your body moving, and let your tongue free a little bit. Free your jaw. Seeing that we're going to be speaking, then we need to get some play into this jaw. Give it some freedom. And seeing that we're going to be listening, then free those ears as well. Okay. let's settle in to the play frame with a moment of meditation. Let's get into that mode of metanoia, that openness to the possibilities of the present. Preparing ourselves to play with the present and be played by it. And we begin by playing with a few breaths. Okay. Now we're getting into that playful mood. To begin, I would like to place a toy into the play frame. Something very simple, but very well suited to this session. And that's the letter S. So as we play today, we can give our attention to the letter S. See where it appears, see where it disappears. And for as many people as possible to participate, oh wait a minute, there's the P trying to slide in, sneak in through the side door. For as many people as possible to participate, let the audience play in the chat. Throw out ideas, throw out feelings, throw out moods. Maybe we'll pick up on some. And if we don't, then maybe other players will pick up on them. Now, I'd like to provide an initial string to play upon for this topic of metamodern play. And then I'm going to playfully define the players so we can plunge into this in that playful mode. So what is metamodern play? One way of understanding it is that it is playing with states and states. So states with a small s and states with a big S. A state with a small s are the inner states. And as we enter into this metamodern era, we're gaining more and more agency over a full spectrum of inner states. As we become more and more skilled at playing with meditation, at playing with contemplation, at playing with shamanic states, at playing with ideas, at playing with depth, at playing with complexity. Like never before, we have access to an internal ecology of games, a ludo-ecology, if you will. And then there are states with a big S. States with a big S are the external states. They're the states of the collective consciousness. How do we play together? How do we organize our societies in a way where everybody gets a chance to play? How do we create group conversations where everybody gets the opportunity to be heard? How do we play with sovereignty in new ways, releasing the trapped energies by the stakes of the past and freeing them back into the potential of the present? Okay, now let's get into the fun part. Let's get into the play. But before that, I would like to name our players one last time. We have player one, Daniel Görtz, the mysterious man of metamodern mastery, one of the few human beings with the curious capability of having half of himself in two places at once. We have player two, Sarah Perry, farmer of ribbons, grave cradler, deeply lazy and lazily deep, the seamless seamstress of ritual revolution, weave meaning and mean weaving live for us today on the Stoa. We have player three, John Vervaeke, the Dukkha destroyer, the sage player wielding the dharmic sword against domicide, guiding the stolen culture into the kairotic moment. And player four, LCC, me, myself, and I. Daniel, if I may ask you, how would you describe this metamodern moment, and how does play fit in to metamodernism?
Thank you, Laurence. I mean, numero uno is that metamodernism is a kind of framework for understanding. It's kind of cultural sensibility, really. And within that cultural sensibility, you have a number of different theories and projects and so on that try to go beyond modernity as we know it, break through the prison walls of the everyday life that we know it as we know it, and try to arrive at another relatively utopian destination, particularly which has certain properties such as a self-reflective culture, aware of inner dimensions and supportive of development and relationalities and all their complexities, right? And today, modernity is not that. It's a lot of things, but it's not that. And for this reason, we're kind of locked out of a lot of, when we participate in everyday life, we're kind of locked out of a lot of the real fun and meaningful stuff in life. So we kind of, a lot of us have this sense that, well, there should be more to this thing. There should be more to, I mean, I was born into this awesome, super mysterious cosmos, which literally has black holes and event horizons. And here I am, thinking about a mortgage and a 9 to 5 or something. There appears to be an insult to the human spirit there, and the human spirit or consciousness and participative perspectives in reality in general want to break out and recreate, and that would be a kind of relative utopia. Now, the play part is very, very, very important, because when you work with something that big, which is about transforming core structures of society. I mean, obviously, it gets pretty serious in many ways. It's about serious issues. After all, it's about life and death, and it's about existence, and it's about our relationship to one another and to other sentient beings. So I have further points, but I'd like to stop at this one. Play, by definition, has to be optional. It's what distinguishes play from work is that work, you kind of have to do it or else. Whereas play, it can be the exact same activity, but because you know it is fully volitional and there is no fear, shame, or guilt driven scaffold for it, you know it's volitional, and in that you're kind of free. So the whole Metamodern project, which is a project I believe akin in historical significance in some ways, whether or not we'll be under this terminology or not, to modernity itself, it only works if it's playful. It only works if it's optional, and it's only optional if you can quit and you can say, okay, screw this, I'm going to do something else, so that it never becomes this totalizing thing that everything has to be about, right? So I would say that's like an important boundary we just have to keep and just have to help uphold to keep each other in as optional and volitional creative relationships as possible when we try to redefine our relationship to reality. Yeah. Do you want to give the word to a next person, Laurence, or should I, or invite somebody?
I think now we can just open up the playground.
Thank you, Daniel. That was helpful as always. I suppose how I'm coming into this is around ideas I have about what I call serious play and why I think that's important. I think one of the defining features of modernity, and it starts with Occam and it just gains acceleration up to Descartes, is the modernist idea that we do not need to undergo significant personal transformation in order to gain access to truths. The idea is that truths are all accessible to a particular method that we can just implement and replicate. It's one of the central ideas of modernity. And we lost the idea that there are aspects of reality that only are disclosed to us when we go through some significant process of self-transformation, self-transcendence. And we, of course, know that we are beings inherently capable of this. And we just do some child psychology, and you can see the huge qualitative shifts that children engage in. And what's interesting about that is the primary process by which they engage in that transformation. So becoming mature is not just a matter of gaining more facts. It's about actually changing the machinery of the psyche and the self in a fundamental way. And it gives you access to the world that you don't ever have access as you remain immature. And what's the process by which children largely go through that kind of qualitative development? Well, it's play. And that's because play solves what's called the transformation paradox, made famous by L.A. Paul and Agnes Callard. The transformation paradox is, and Galen Strawson sort of made it famous, if I make my future self, there's no self-transcendence. It's just me making more of me. And if it's totally other than me, then it's not self-transcendent, it's something slammed into me and made me other than I am. And so how do you get out of that? And L.A. Paul has made that like really central in her work. It's like, when I'm here now, I don't know what it's going to be like to be me there then. This is why people go into therapy. People know propositionally what they want, but they don't know how to get there. because they don't know what it'll be like to be them there, and they don't know who they'll be when they get there. So they're stuck, they're trapped. Now, one of the things people do when they're trapped between two worlds is they create a liminal space of play that allows them to taste the future self in the future world while still remaining in, having one foot in the identity in the world they're in, so that they can more readily compare them. In fact, I would argue that's the only way we can go through transformation, the liminal space of play. The problem with our culture, and it goes tandem with the modern idea that you don't need to engage in transformation to get truth, is the trivialization of play, that play is done only for fun, that play has no serious function to it. And this, of course, is just a ridiculous idea. Most of the things we take very seriously, and because they contribute to our humanity, are instances of serious play. We play music, we go and watch a play. There's all kinds of things we do that are play, that are very serious and meant to be transformative therein. So the issue for me is the place where we used to house and home all those serious plays that afforded people transformation, because as the child is to the adult is to the sage. The place that used to that was religion. Religion is the storehouse of traditions of serious play. And for most people, the religious option is not viable anymore, or at least for many people, and that's a growing demographic. And you see many forms of serious play springing up. You have all kinds of role-playing games and Jeep form, and Dungeons and Dragons is going through a huge renaissance right now. So there's all these attempts to engage in serious play. My concern about that is how do we properly home these emergent forms of serious play so that they don't echo chamber and bubble chamber themselves, so they can mutually afford and constrain and critique each other in a self-correcting fashion without trying to acquiesce in one of the existing religions or give in to some state player who's going to offer some totalitarian arena. And so at that point, I feel that my work intersects very strongly with Daniel's because I see metamodernism as trying to do that. Metamodernism, to my understanding, and I welcome Daniel to correct me, but it accepts a lot of the modernist critique. It doesn't say we don't reject the modernist critique of traditionalism, but it also accepts the postmodern critique of modernity. And I'm trying to, I think, get to that same place. So that's where I think my work on serious play intersects very seriously with Daniel's. And I'm trying to understand I want people to understand, that I'm not just doing this as a theorist. I am a theorist, I'm a cognitive scientist, but I'm a participant observer. I've been engaging in long forms, long traditions for long periods of my life of extensive serious play. We used to have a word for serious play, and it's a taboo word. It's ritual. And ritual is supposed to transform us so we get the truths that are only accessible through transformation, the sacred truths, because that's what I think makes them the sacred truths. So how do we, I'm almost paraphrasing Camus, who said, I wanted to be a saint without God. My question is, how do we have ritual without religion, if I had to put it in a slogan?
So there's these words we're using: play, ritual, other ones, freedom, leisure, I think are getting at kind of the same underlying thing that's hard to talk about. Often I see ritual explanations about things that we just don't understand. Well, it was a ritual. It's some sort of irrational thing that they're doing. I think a lot of stuff that we call ritual is play, is sort of the free behavior of people, and it happens to be that people like doing things in a in the same way, in kind of standardized ways, that it's like a way of forming rules to the game, because you can't really, it's a little less interesting to play without any constraints. But there's this big, deep, important phenomenon. I don't know what the proper name is, but what people do when they're free. I don't know, post-rationalism is inherently play because it's a joke. It started out as a joke, and people enjoy either taking it seriously or pretending to take it seriously. And one of the main forms of play is just defining it, trying to say what it is. But I think one of the things we can learn from that is just how many things that we think are real were just jokes, or just is sort of deprecatory, but we're not entirely sincere from the beginning. We're some kind of play, something that's weirder than just everything means exactly what they say it means.
There's a very interesting relationship between ritual and play, an interesting spectrum to be played out there, which is ritual often has this highly scripted nature. It's very clearly defined. There's specific rules, there's specific things that you say at specific times, specific actions which you take. Whereas play is, in its purest form, completely open. There's no definition whatsoever, and you're playing with all of the potential dimensions of being and just exploring whatever direction does the present moment take you in. And then there's an in-between point, which is like ritual play and playful ritual, which is where there's a certain amount of frame around the play that property present in a very specific manner. So by defining specific rules of a game, you can then define the emergent properties, and you can harness those emergent properties to generate specific states, specific individual states and specific collective states. And through that, you can generate individual catharsis or collective catharsis, or you can take a violent impulse and focus that death drive onto a sphere that 24 people run around playing with, trying to score each other, trying to kill each other symbolically by penetrating the other's territory with this sphere.
That to me sounds very similar to the distinction Kars makes. Unfortunately, he died, but his distinction between finite and infinite games. In the infinite game, part of the rules are you can change the rules. And what's interesting is this maps onto Apter's distinction between two, what he calls metamotivational states. These are ways we frame our somatic arousal, our psychological somatic arousal. When we're in the telic state, we are doing an activity for the sake of some external goal. So it's finite, it's delimited. And when we're very aroused, that's unpleasant, that's frustration or anger because we're not getting to the goal we value. When we're in the paratelic state, we're doing we reverse everything. That's why it's called reversal theory. We set up goals for the sake of engaging in the process. It's completely reversal. So you can tell the difference by would you like a shortcut? So for me, brushing my teeth is completely telic. And if you could give me a shortcut so I could get right to the goal, I'd take it. Now, if you ask me the same thing with making love with somebody, I don't want the shortcut, right? The end state, the goal state is there just so I can engage in the activity. And in the paratelic state, high arousal is framed as excitement, involvement. And so I agree with Daniel's point about options, but I want to also bring in that there's this meta-motivational framing of our state of arousal that also distinguishes work from play. Now, the thing I want to bring in about what you just said, Laurence, about ritual and play is it's very hard to have no structure for play. So the paratelic state in high engagement is mostly pursued, I would say psychologically, for a universal, which is to get into the flow state. And the flow state requires some pretty universal characteristics. It requires clear feedback, error matters, right? And right, there has to be tight coupling between what you do and the environmental response. So that's why people like video games. That's why they play video games, because they have those features and they allow people to level up and do, it's all pure paratelic flow induction. It's also why they play jazz. That's why they do rock climbing. So I understand what you mean about it being not as defined, but I think I'm suggesting that there's a lot more overlap with the two than I think you were suggesting. I think even in the most free-flowing play, there is a huge implicit safety framing. So, for example, we are playing here because we're all going to abide by the rules of English. We're all going to abide by the rules of Zoom. We're all going to abide by the rules of pleasant discourse. We're all going to abide by the rules of what goes on at the Stoa. There's a huge framing here, and I think we rely on that. So I would suggest that maybe a better attitude is how transparent and aware we are of the framing and how much we are willing to bring the framing into the play. And I think many religious and spiritual rituals do that explicitly. The mystical tradition is all about bringing the religious frame itself into the ritual of play so that we can self-transcend through it. So I just want to put that out there as something to continue the conversation.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, yeah, a lot of what has been said resonates. I particularly want to think a little bit about this thing about security, order. I mean, well, let's say in a close relationship or with your kids. So you make your kids safe so that they can play, right? You make them safe and secure, and the moment they're not feeling safe and secure, or you're being held back by trauma, they stop playing. So I mean, I think we could delve into that a little bit. It just one thing from theory that I've been part of developing is this triad of order, freedom, and equality. That we tend to think of these as different things. If you like freedom a little more, you like order a little less. And whereas they can be viewed as a fractal, that a sufficiently well organized order with different levels of order, which helps to reinvent itself and so on, creates more freedom. And in greater freedom, people are less constrained and thus less competitive, and thus you have equality as an emergent property of such things. And equality in turn helps establish order, for instance, whereas inequality, of course, undermines order in society. But I mean, I'm guessing other speakers are more expert on this. Like trauma would stop play from happening, right? It's kind of when does life get really serious? You know, it's when we're not safe and secure, when there's a wound opening up and we fail to orient ourselves in reality as a result, I suppose. And I brought this up in the chat, and there were some interesting responses. I want to read a couple of them up. So I wrote, question to others, trauma creates a kind of constriction on play, no? A child will perpetually play. They really will. You watch a kindergarten, all of the kids are perpetually playing the moment they get the chance, right? Unless they're sad. Do we need to address shared and personal trauma to unlock play in society? And I mean, of course, the implication would be yes. Here, Laura Cleveland responds, or trauma makes us play the same games over and over. placing ourselves in the same roles. So in that sense, not truly play. That's interesting. You can become a footballer to prove yourself, for instance, focusing the death drive on the sphere. Or, and Steph VM writes, at Daniel, yes, especially since laughter is an instinctive and physiological way we recover from trauma. And Aaron Rogerson writes, at Daniel, we also need to recognize the potential of trauma when playing. Do things need to matter or be risky for play to be serious? All of which are, yeah, interesting. Yes, and Lisa Norton writes, yes, according to Porges, at least, the states of nervous system constrain what we are available for, right? And which is, it resonates with what you just said, John. Yeah, just want to hear you out on this.
Well, I'm the psychologist, so I guess on trauma and stuff. Yeah, very much. So, I mean, so, you know, Apter talks about safety framing. There's other people talk about scarcity mentality. Laughter and humor are indications of the opposite, cognitive flexibility. So if people are in scarcity mentality and they're not in a safety frame, they can't play. They, in fact, go into the opposite. They're not sort of opening up reciprocally. They're narrowing down. So the relationship between the states and the states isn't going this way. It's narrowing. It's getting more rigid. They're losing cognitive flexibility. And of course, the sort of an ultimate version of that is addiction, which has kind of the same absorptive qualities as play, but it's exactly the opposite. You're not playing in heaven. You're entrapped in hell. And that's because it's the same machinery at work, but in different directions. So yeah, I think, and that's what I mean, that goes back to the point, and I'm not trying to steal your point, Daniel, I'm just trying to sew it back. The thing about religions is they gave people a metaphysical safety frame, and then they gave them a community safety frame, and then an institutional safety frame. They did all this safety framing so that, right, and you grew up in the church very much like a child of the church. So there was all this safety framing going on. Now, I'm not saying the religions are without criticism. They're deserving of a lot of criticism. That's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is that cultures universally have figured out that we have to do a lot of work, right, to put people into this very nested recursive safety framing before deeply transformative serious play can happen. And that brings up the possibility, as you said, of that play can be itself traumatic. Right, and this depends again on how we're playing. We can play out of curiosity, which is we're just trying to fill a hole in our knowledge. And the thing about that is, notice again the motivation. If I prolong your curiosity, you find it aversive. If I gave you a mystery novel to read and you never find out who did it, eventually you just get pissed off and frustrated. But if you're in wonder, right, then that's different. Then you will allow that to be expanded into awe, but you don't want it to go into horror. You don't want it to go into horror. So you have to take, I mean, the point about serious play and what a lot of these traditions got really good at was taking us to the horizon of horror and giving us some very clear feedback and signals about you can go this far and it's going to be challenging and you're going to be afraid and you're going to experience awe and you're going to be transformed. It's going to be painful, but we'll be here. Here's the safety framing. And then, but don't go beyond this because you're not ready yet. You're not ready. So they had traditions, they had pedagogical programs. Now, they couldn't function perfectly because no such program can, but they functioned very well at getting people through that. And while I embrace and I'm involved with all these emerging communities, right? And there are places that are trying to create these pedagogical programs within homing. I think we're not giving enough attention to that side of the equation. And you can see me trying to gesture this into being. I'm trying to gesture the framing into being with my hands. And so part of what I would like people, well, we're doing it now. This is what we need to be doing more of. We need to be doing more like really, really careful reflection on what do we need to do to move beyond valorizing play to really appreciating play? So I'll stop talking.
There's an interesting parallel between trauma and a broken toy. A dimension of being which we tried to play with, that we toyified, we tried to gain a grip upon, we tried to twist it or turn it in a specific way. And then something about that interaction broke us. It broke the reflection of the outer toy within ourselves. And ever since then, we can no longer grip it correctly. We either let it go, we don't dare touch it, or we grip it so tightly that we're repeating the same movement over and over again. It's as if it was a piece of string and it snapped, and we're trying to hold the two pieces together. Now, on the subject of these recursive, religious, self-updating process of deepening the state of play into greater depths and greater complexity, we need moments for ourselves to stop the games that we've currently been playing and to explore new games, to enter into that liminal zone. And we do that in solitude. But solitude is a lot more abundant than collective liminal states. So what we need is a collective playground for this recursive religion to explore itself, to continue to self-update itself, to generate the new practices that we need. Practices, forms of play which don't currently exist to contain the ever-increasing complexity and depth that we're confronted with, of returning always cyclically to those perennial problems, but with the new practices that we need to adapt to the present moment.
I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot, but that just sparked me a lot. What you just described, Laurence, is exactly what I'm trying to build with a lot of my collaborators, Peter and Chris Pietro, Guy Senstock, and others, around this notion of Dialogos. How can we turn the act of communication back into the play of communing with each other in that self-transcending, recursively self-transcending fashion, where the priority on the discourse is placed on all of us getting to places together through insight and emergence that we couldn't get through individually. Now, the thing about trauma and the brokenness, yeah, I mean, what breaks in trauma is the imagination. What breaks in trauma is the imagination. So what happens is people get caught up in images that they relive and that they can't escape from. That's the defining feature of trauma. It's a breaking, the imagination gets broken. And I would put it to you that our imagination is pretty much collectively broken in our culture, because we've reduced imagination to mental imagery, as opposed to what you are doing right now. This is the distinction that Corbin made between the imaginary and the imaginal. Mental imagery is creating pictures in your mind. The imaginal is something you do between you and the world. It's like when the child pretends to be Superman or pretends to be a mythological being by putting on a mask or a costume. And the places where we used to have imaginal play, again, we're largely in religious contexts. And I think what we need to do is figure out, see what, how augmented reality works, right? Like think about a heads-up display for a fighter pilot. Things are projected on the screen so that they can see things through the world. That's how the imaginal works. We don't keep the images inside for our own consumption and production. We project them out so that they augment and disclose. It's perspicacious projection that discloses the world to us in new ways. And part of what I mean by recovering serious play is to recover sorry, this sounds ridiculously pretentious, but to heal the way the imagination is broken by getting people to deeply appreciate the play of the imaginal and what that means. How can the imagination be something that actually enhances our depth perception, our ontological depth perception, rather than being that which we use to turn away from looking at reality? That's something I'm trying to reflect on.
I wonder where you guys think that the modern trauma frame came from. I hear the abstract noun trauma a lot. Is it that we discovered something new, or is it that the abstract noun fits into a concept that we'd like to have?
Well, part of it's just the history of our increasing encounter with worse and worse warfare. Trauma was with World War I shell shock, right? And PTSD, Vietnam, right? And so, and as the wars have become increasingly more, well, sorry, I was going to say traumatizing, that's circular. As the wars have been increasingly harder and harder for us to accommodate into our narratives, they've been increasingly more pervasive in their impact on people. And then there's aspects of the society in general that we are discovering are analogous to what, so that's its history. And so one way, perhaps, this is a speculative generalization, so please take it as that, but one way I think why the idea of trauma is that extreme combativeness that can't be accommodated within people's narratives is becoming more and more pervasive in our society at many different levels of organization. And so we're experiencing things more and more analogous to people who have been traumatized in warfare. So I think that's part of the historical explanation of how this is coming out to be more and more prominent in our discourse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think also just more research, right? Like, and it was in humanist psychology a long time. Well, hey, wait a minute. Folks are stunted versions of themselves, right? We are, I should say. And then we notice it's like, okay, you leave a baby for 3 hours per day. That's it. You leave a baby for 3 hours per day and boom, you have many instances of what could be called trauma at the epigenetic level and so on, right? I mean, I'm very curious about what could be, what could be said from a more strictly post-rationality perspective, Sarah. So it would be nice to just hear some meandering thoughts about how you see an intersection there, because you already mentioned something. You mentioned that the very term is a kind of a joke, and in metamodernism, humor is very, very, very important, very central. However, I think it's very important that it's optional. By the way, authenticity, right? We go to all of these conferences and there's a norm about authenticity and so on. But wait a minute, if there's a norm about authenticity, people start pressuring one another, subtly punishing one another for not being authentic and showing up enough. And then it's not play, and then the authenticity becomes inauthentic, and then even the play gets inauthentic. And well, there's certainly a profound paradox to be worked out there in, let's say, the larger progressive milieu. Yeah, those are some thoughts on metamodernism and play, and that in metamodernism such things as sincere irony or informed naivety, magical realism are very important. Again, marrying play and seriousness, right? However, within the very same framework, you can write a completely sober academic paper with no jokes in it, right? The jokes have to be, I mean, it kind of shoots down itself if it becomes like a pressure or norm to conform to. The goal of that play, of metamodern play, is play at a higher level of complexity. We don't want to play with Barbie dolls. I mean, we can do that, but metamodern play would be adult play and would be play with the nature of culture itself, or the structures of culture itself, right? Yeah, yeah. My question is unclear, but I want to hear more.
Sorry, for me? Okay. This is hard play for me because I find it difficult to enter the frame, the play frame, where you take the abstracts of psychology paper seriously. And the trauma frame I find really hard to get into. That I just find myself very skeptical. I haven't gone down the rabbit hole in psychology, except very, very slightly that particular one, but I'm not sure what exactly it means to get into that frame. I'm not sure how much, I mean, has been affected by the recent epistemic crisis in psychology, but I don't want to crap on it because it's a form of kind of magical play that people are obviously, any concept that people take seriously and build around is interesting for that reason. So I would like to be able to understand it better. I think I've kind of, my current form of play is kind of hostile to it. So it's, yeah, I would like to be a better folklorist and understand it in a deeper way.
Tell us about the demon mask and how it makes you feel, Laurence. We only have a few more minutes. We have to get to the important stuff.
With masks, we can play with archetypes. We can express energies that normally we wouldn't dare to express. And we can play with these archetypal energies either by temporarily adopting another avatar, like summoning a different dimension of our individual self. And the more that we practice that specific dimension, the easier it becomes to play with that in everyday life when that is summoned, when it is called upon, when it is called upon to act. We have more play, we have more control over that archetypal energy. So if we can figure out in the religion, which is not a religion, how to develop forms of play and games that allow us to play with all of these different archetypal energies, both individually and collectively, all of our consequent interactions when we're outside of the religious, outside of the sacred space, will flow.
I think that point you just made is a pivotal one, right? So when they talk about video game addiction, they're getting into the flow state in the video game, but their lives are reciprocally narrowing because they're playing in a way that doesn't transfer. So one of the things, so I've been doing Taoist practices in a college of Taoist practices for nearly 3 decades, and in communication in conjunction with other practices from other traditions. But the thing that really made an impression on me was when I'd been doing Tai Chi Chuan for about 3 years, religiously, and so I'm sort of using that word playfully. I meant very dedicatedly, very deeply. And I was getting into the flow state while I was doing it and things like that. And that was great and wonderful. And I was enjoying it. And there was times when my body would be very hot, very cold. So all this transformations going on at levels you don't normally access with just our normal everyday discourse. So that was all wonderful. But I was in grad school, tells you how long ago that was. My friends started saying to me, what are you doing? And they didn't know about this practice. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, you've changed. You're more balanced in your evaluation of theories, and you're more flexible in your discussions. And then I realized, oh my goodness, right? This form of play, because in Chinese, by the way, you don't do Tai Chi Chuan, you play, like the way you play a musical instrument. This form of play has been crafted so that it generalizes, it permeates and percolates. Permeates through your life, percolates up and down through your body and your mind in ways that you can't even foresee. And there's a deep wisdom there. And we have to do more to understand how do we get the forms of play that do what Laurence was talking about, that percolate and permeate powerfully. And the video game, right? The video game example is a pertinent example of something that can be in the moment seem very powerful, but does not generally transfer well. In fact, it has the opposite. That's why the WHO has made it actually an official disorder, right? Because it actually isolates you. You get local agency at the expense of global agency. So we need to develop, apprenticeships around becoming connoisseurs of the kinds of play that will permeate and percolate. And we can discern them from the kinds of play that won't do that for us. And that's part of, again, what I mean by serious play. Serious play, and that's exactly like Laurence said, that's what the religions used to do. You would do it over here, but you would do it in such a way, and the intent was it would transfer to your life and to your community in general. And again, my concern is we're not talking enough and putting enough attention towards that, I think pivotal dimension, especially if we want to do something like steal the culture with serious play.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, Daniel. We've reached the hour, and now is the perfect time to actually participate in some serious play and to play a glass bead game. So, what is the glass bead game? The glass bead game is a game of taking turns to co-create meaning together. So what we're going to do is the 4 of us are going to play a game. We're going to play a game on play. And we're going to take 1-minute turns to talk on the topic of play. And the way that we're going to count those minutes is with the timer, which I just put into the chat. So if you click on that timer, when we launch the game, you'll hear an audio cue. You'll hear a bell, bing, which will mark the end of your turn. So if we're going to play the 4 of us together, we're going to need an order. So we can play in the order.
Question. Do I click this when I begin to speak and it's a 1-minute timer? Is that how it works, Laurence?
No, so you click that now and that will open in your web browser. And then when I start the game, I'll press play on the timer and everything will happen automatically.
Okay, I just
countdown will happen and you'll hear it in the background.
Okay.
So we can play in the order of the players. So that would be player 1, Daniel Görtz, player 2, Sarah Perry, player 3, John Vervaeke, player 4, myself. Now, What makes the Graspy game different from just a general conversation are three things. Number one, we try to avoid the use of I and you so we can bypass the ego. Two, we try and interconnect as much as possible our turn with the previous turn. And number three, we try and veritate as much as possible. What does that mean? It means to condense, to concentrate as much truth as we can into our minute. The game begins with a minute of meditation, so we can return to that 0 point, and ends with a minute of contemplation, so we can reflect upon what we have played. So, once more, the order is Daniel, Sarah, John, myself, and the 1 minute meditation will begin in 3, 2, 1, go.
It's okay to quit. It's okay to retire. It's okay to not play this particular or that particular game. You don't have to change the world. You don't have to, or I don't have to change the world. I don't have to make a difference. I don't have to make a dent in the universe. It's optional, but there's an invitation just for fun. And the invitation is always bigger than the particular game that I happen to be playing at this particular moment. The real game is in the open horizon that lies beyond this particular game. I pinged, so it's Sarah.
Play justifies itself. It doesn't need a purpose. There are dark things that we might find in play. One of those is competitive excellence, scoring points, having play that's not just cooperative, but where some kind of excellence is pursued. And there are differences in how comfortable that feels, but practice can make it more comfortable. In speedrunning, I think, in speedrunning, there's a particular emphasis on legible excellence, speedrunning video games. And that's a very desirable, important thing. It would be kind of turning away a gift just to say that, well, all play has to be cooperative, and scoring points is somehow a lesser form of play than building together. I think that's a spicy lesson from play for me as a woman, and mostly learning that from men.
So in play, try to get beyond the divisions that we work within, the division between inner and outer, the division between lower and upper, the division between motion and rest. Try to find a place that's both deeper and more encompassing than the divisions, and try to breathe there. Try to feel what it's like to be there, and how that might go beyond the moment of play itself.
Playing with the inner and the outer, playing with the up and the down, playing with the breath. It's the fundamental toy, the very first toy that we can access. And then with attention, with that string that we can curl around any dimension of being, learning how to strengthen those strings, how to prolong those strings, how to weave more and more strings around more and more dimensions, so we can play with more and more of being simultaneously. Learning to cut by learning how to tune our own strings. So tuning with others.
And humans play not only with humans, we also play with robots. As Laurence sound reminded us, there are automatic responses from the things around us, and which don't come from conscious beings. There are material agents, and somehow viewed soberly and with the clarity of mind that comes from having a very good day, you can hear those invitations and see them. The lampposts are there to play with you. The street planning is a joke. The wind, of course, whispers and sings little songs. And hopefully we can expand the play that we play together with other human beings to that wider realm. Sarah.
It's definitely not a matter of choosing what to play. It's listening to calls and being willing to get called by stuff that's already out there, to notice what's already interesting. And there won't be any one form of play that's perfect. There will be a billion forms of play. Everybody will get called by different things. There's no sort of optimal thing to be interested in.
There's no optimal thing to be interested in. That to me is the essence of our cognition. There isn't a final thing that we should be interested in or care about. So that makes me think of the connections between play and caring. and like what we most care about. Can we care about things more without turning them into the ultimate final thing we should all care about at all times? How do we play with the sacred without turning it into the final God?
How do we play with care? How do we care for play? How do we care for the players? How do we care for the playground? How do we play with the sacred? How do we open up sacred playgrounds? Places which are serious enough for us to believe in them and yet to not fear our own agency within them, to not fear the sacred, to not fear being burnt by the sacred when we try and play with it. How to learn how to play with fire, how to learn how to dance with fire, to dance with the earth, to dance with water, to dance with air, to dance with all the different archetypes, to play with them and be played by them, to attune to all those different clearly defined dimensions of being and enter into interaction, enter into
How do we play with God? Indeed. Well, God always plays with us either way, so we should better play back. And any God worth believing in is one we should be able to play with. One we should be able to scrutinize and challenge. And well, I mean, the most sacred of all is that which remains sacred after you defame. You do your best attempt, give your best attempt at ridiculing it and defaming it. I mean, the sacredness that that is still there once you have desecrated the shrine. So a desecrated shrine would kind of be a sacred playground, I guess, in some ways. A steel god, yes, a steel god, very very nice.
My favorite phrase is play back, that you were talking about with regarding God. If God's playing with us, we can play back. I think that would be a great bumper sticker slogan. If someone plays it, you play back. That's the core advice for how to create more play. And it's hard. It's something that you have to learn how to play back, and that's even an option. But I like that as a slogan for keeping that option in mind.
Playing back, that's interesting. So there's a Japanese tradition of wabe where you break the vase and then you put it back together. And that's an act of play. And it's considered to be better than the original vase because you've played with the impermanence of all things. You have not, you've included that in your play. And it's considered a powerful aesthetic. So I think, oh, no, sorry, not supposed to say I think, perhaps we should consider the trauma of grieving the death of God and also the play, the wabe play of putting it back together in a new way.
That was the final move. Now we can settle into a minute of contemplation and just let all those ideas, all those thoughts settle in. Well, thank you everybody for playing. Unfortunately, I think we had some problems with the timer because of my internet connection, which was a bit unfortunate. But it was a good game, very interesting. Peter, back over to you. We've got another 10 minutes if you want to launch us into a few questions, a few answers.
All right, thank you, Laurence. So let there be light at the Stoa. Everyone can turn on their camera. You get to see your faces. If you have any questions, we might not have time for much, but just maybe put up your hand. We can see you, or in the icon feature, just throw something in the chat. But while that's happening, I'm curious, just maybe Sarah, Daniel, John, any thoughts on that you'd like to kind of share? Maybe a quick roundtable while some questions come in.
Well, a lot of
Thoughts on which, Peter?
The Glass Bead game that you just played.
a lot of content thoughts, of course, but leaving that aside, I have had the pleasure to play this game a few times before with Laurence, and I feel it's one important trope in this realm of ritual exploration, right? Because there's this open-endedness to it that which still has a strict ritual form. It's just, yeah, kind of enjoyable, and can help like let the things surface, right?
I thought it was cool. I'm really interested in all these emerging modalities and seeing where they overlap and where they differentiate and how they could potentially fit together. Yeah, this aspect of trying to get people to unpack and do the more is really good. I'd like to see if it could be integrated with the more we also get from each other when we challenge each other. So there's incorporation and jazzing and riffing, but there's also challenging and responding. And I'm interested in both of those movements within dialectic and dialogos. But so thank you for this, Laurence. I think this is definitely a really interesting and useful practice.
I can sense that there's a distinct mental state there. I'm not good enough at this to get into it yet, but it's kind of like circling as a practice. Like it takes a couple tries to get into the distinct mental state. So I know there's something cool there. You could tell there's something cool there.
Yeah, so every Saturday at the Stoa in our Wisdom Gym, we have the Glass Bead game. And I'm glad you had experience with it, John, because it's kind of like interfaces well with some of the other intersubjective practices we've been investigating. So we might only have time for one question, but we'll take in Laura Cleveland. Laura Cleveland, you had a question for the Dialogos panel.
Hi, thank you for such rich play today. I just have a quick question. How do you distinguish serious play from trivial?
So I guess maybe since I coined the term serious play, I should be the first respondent. So part of it goes towards what I said. For me, I would have a set of criteria, but one of the most important is to what degree does it permeate and percolate through your life in a way that transforms you, so you start to get access to dimensions of the world and of reality, yourself and other people, that you previously didn't have. And if it's trivial, it won't percolate or permeate. The transformations won't disclose much. If it's profound, it'll permeate and percolate and afford transformations that disclose a lot and enhance your sense of being connected to what's more real. That's how I would answer that. I'm using the term real in a pragmatic sense, not in any final ontological sense.
you can see seriousness as connected to depth, and that when you're playing deeply, then as you're going down, you're entering into a zone of more and more interconnectedness with the whole of being. So the more serious that you're getting, you might be doing a puzzle, but if you're playing in that interconnected context, then even though you're doing something which on the surface appears trivial, it's actual serious play.
I of course agree with that, what has been said formally. The seriousness. Yeah, I wanted to bring this thing in, mastery, right? So if you're a mountain climber, you're pushing your limits, then when you're at the limits of your mastery, things get pretty serious for a while, right? But then you've mastered that level of mountain climbing or whatever, and you tell your friends, oh yeah, I did that mountain, it was child's play. Yeah, I guess serious play would, well, in conjunction to what you guys said, would be that which pushes us there, but does so not just on a personal level, but also, of course, on a transpersonal level, that the stakes of the game get higher because we're in it together and we're playing with the structures, cultural structures that we're going to live our lives in either way, right? Which is, after all, a serious matter. So yeah, on that knife's edge, right? That's, well, John has already said it better.
Any thoughts, Sarah? I don't
I don't really have a cool distinction. I guess I think there's lame play, but I don't know how trivial play can get. I'm trying to think of what's trivial to me, like playing the game where you match jewels. That's pretty trivial. I don't know, but I like the more connected it is, the John's explanation that the more connected it is to other things in your life, the deeper it is. That feels true for me. Like walking is kind of a lame hobby, but if you're walking in the mountains trying to collect fallen chunks of substance that you're going to use to dye your shawl, so that it feels a little more meaningful. That once they're kind of connected together, they feel like they are parts of a whole somehow. I don't know, something without any context can feel trivial. Maybe that's the core of it.
Trivial as an adjective is also connected to the trivium, which in the ages was the lower division of the 7 liberal arts. So maybe we can say that trivial play is actually serious play.
Then it comes full circle. So I think that might be a good place to end, because I want to respect it ending at the bottom of the hour, even though we have a few more questions. But I'll take in maybe Laurence briefly. If Laurence, you have any kind of closing thoughts, or anyone else on the panel would like to just share anything that came alive for them in today's session.
The key to play is the present moment, and our capability to attune to the present moment and to perceive the full potentiality of it. We always see just tiny little slices of what is actually there. And the more that we can open up to that, and the more that we can attune to that, and the more that we can learn to play those different strings, the more potential we can release from the present moment.
Cool. Any closing thoughts, Sarah, Daniel, John, would you like to share?
Well, just nice, relaxed, invigorating discussion to be part of. Yeah, thanks, guys.
Yeah, my final thought is just thank you. As always, it's a pleasure to be here at the Stoa. It was nice meeting you, Laurence and Sarah. And it was nice seeing you again, Daniel. Very nice.
Yeah, thank you all. That was great. That felt risky and fun.
Yeah, it felt as being the steward. It's like this was an interesting combination. I didn't know how it was going to go, but I'm happy that we had an enjoyable experience here. And I'll share Lisa's Norton's comment. She said, maybe there's no trivial games, only trivial relationships with play, which got a lot of plus ones in the chat. So that being said, I'll make some closing announcements in a moment. But Laurence, Sarah, Daniel, John, thank you so much for joining the Stoa today. Aaron, do you want to plug that your event tomorrow, your shadow play event, real brief before I just plug one event?
Yeah, tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Time at the Stoa, Lubomir Arsov, artist and creator of the In Shadow short film. You can find it on YouTube. You should watch it if you haven't. He's coming to speak with us about technocracy and synthetic shadow culture, the effect that technology and social media what they're having on our shadow. So we'd love to have you, 2 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow.
Very cool. Definitely recommend checking out the Shadow Play series here at the Stoa. And then the only talk about one event, or I'll plug one, March 21st, 1-year anniversary of the Stoa. Then maybe the end of the Stoa party. We'll be playful with that and find out. And there's going to be a lot of fun games at that session. So feel free to check it out. That being said, everyone, thanks for coming to the Stoa today.